My sons let me die on a Tuesday. They knew I was in that hospital. The nurse called both of them twice, and when my older son finally picked up, he told her. And I know this because she told me herself, her voice barely above a whisper. He said, "We'll deal with it when the time comes." I was still breathing when he said that. Barely, but breathing. When they finally showed up 4 days later, it wasn't to hold my hand. It was to ask a nurse where I kept my financial documents. But I wasn't in that bed anymore. I had left something for them, though. A sealed envelope on the pillow. When my older son opened it, his face went the color of old ash. His brother had to sit down. They were so certain they had already won. They were wrong. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I read every single one. The pain hit me like something structural had given way inside my chest. A deep, grinding collapse that sent me to my kitchen floor on a cold November morning. I remember the linoleum. I remember thinking it needed to be mopped. Strange what the mind holds on to when the body is failing. My left arm had gone useless at my side. My words came out scrambled and thick, and the coffee mug I'd been holding shattered somewhere near the refrigerator. I couldn't reach the phone on the counter. I lay there for 22 minutes before my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn who lived across the street, noticed my car hadn't moved and knocked on the door. She saved my life. Not my son's, Evelyn, who I'd shoveled snow for 3 winters running and whose cat I'd found stuck in my oak tree twice. She called 911, rode in the ambulance with me, and held my hand in the ER while they ran tests. She was 71 years old and had a bad hip, and she did not hesitate for a single second. The stroke had been moderate, the neurologist told me. Left side weakness, some speech disruption, but no permanent damage if I rested and followed the protocol. I was lucky, she said. I nodded, because what else do you do? But I kept thinking about the phone call the nurse made to my sons while I was still being stabilized, and I kept thinking about what they said, and luck felt like the wrong word entirely. My older son's name is Dennis. He's 51 years old, runs a landscaping business I financed the equipment for 8 years ago, and has the particular quality of a man who has never once been told no by anyone who mattered. My younger son is called Wayne. Wayne is 46, has a good job in sales that I helped him get through a contact of mine, and spends money the way other people breathe, automatically, without thought, without end. I had loaned Wayne money 11 times in 20 years. I stopped counting after the 11th because the number made me feel foolish. Their mother, my wife Patricia, died of cancer 6 years before that Tuesday in November. She was the one who saw them clearly, who would sit me down and say, "Walter, you have to stop handing them lifelines. You were teaching them that there are no consequences." I would nod and agree, and then Dennis would call with some new crisis, and I would write the check anyway. Patricia would look at me from across the kitchen and not say a word, because she already had. I missed her every day, but I missed her most in that hospital room, staring at the ceiling tiles with my left hand, still not fully cooperating, because she would have known what to do. She always knew what to do. The nurse, a young woman named Brianna who had kind eyes and the particular patience of someone who had seen too much, came in on my second morning and asked if I wanted her to try my sons again. I told her no. She nodded, slowly, the way people do when they already know the situation and are trying to be gentle about confirming it. I asked her, honestly, what Dennis had said when she called. She hesitated. I told her I was 67 years old and had survived a stroke and I deserved the truth. She told me, "We'll deal with it when the time comes." I turned my face toward the window. The parking lot outside was gray and half empty, a few bare trees along the edge of the lot losing their last leaves. I did not cry. I had done my crying for Dennis and Wayne years before, privately, alone, after moments I had made myself forget on purpose. This was just the one I couldn't explain away anymore. On my third day, I asked Brianna if I could borrow a phone charger. My cell had died, and I needed to make a call. She brought one without asking questions, and I dialed the only number I knew I could trust. "His name is Robert." We had been friends for 38 years, since we worked together at the same manufacturing plant outside of Columbus, before either of us had the sense to leave and do something else. Robert had eventually become a paralegal, then a notary, and now ran a small legal services office with his daughter. He was the most methodical, careful, fair-minded person I had ever known. When I told him what had happened, there was a silence on the line. And then he said quietly, "I was afraid something like this was coming." I told him I needed help. He told me to rest and that he would be there the next morning. He was there at 7:45, before the breakfast tray with his leather notebook and a thermos of good coffee because he had correctly guessed that hospital coffee was not going to be enough. What I told Robert that morning, I had not told another living person. Dennis and Wayne had been draining me for years. Not just money, though. There had been a great deal of that. They had taken over my home slowly, the way water takes over a basement. Dennis stored equipment at my house without asking. Wayne had a key and used it freely, would bring people over, had at one point moved a girlfriend in for 3 months without a real conversation about it. When I objected to either of them about anything, the response was always some version of the same thing. "Dad, relax. You have plenty. You don't need all of this," said with the calm certainty of people who had decided my life was a resource rather than a life. Patricia's jewelry. The pieces I had saved after she died, her mother's pearls, a gold bracelet her father gave her when she graduated nursing school. I had discovered 8 months before the stroke that several pieces were missing. I had asked Wayne about it once, carefully. He told me I was probably misremembering. I was not misremembering. Robert wrote it all down. When I was done, he looked at his notes, then looked at me and said, "Walter, what do you want the outcome to be?" I told him. He nodded once, opened his laptop, and started making calls. The first thing I did, from that hospital bed, was contact my bank. I had added both sons to my accounts years ago, the way you do when you get older and want things to be simple. The account manager walked me through removing them as authorized users. My voice was still slightly slurred on the left side from the stroke, but I was clear enough, and I was patient, and I said every word I needed to say. When it was done, I felt something in my chest release, like a knot that had been there so long I had stopped noticing it. Robert handled the rest. My will had named Dennis and Wayne as equal beneficiaries. That changed. The house Patricia and I had bought in 1987. The house where I had built a back deck with my own hands, where she had planted a rose garden that still bloomed every June, was transferred to a different name entirely. The financial accounts, the savings, the small investment portfolio I had built carefully over 40 years of working, redirected every cent of it to a trust Robert helped me structure. The beneficiary of that trust was not either of my sons. Her name is Camille. She is 24 years old, the daughter of my younger brother Marcus, who died of a heart attack when Camille was 9. Marcus had been the better man between us, honestly. Generous, gentle. The kind of father I had tried to be and probably fell short of. When he died, I had promised him, at his graveside on a cold March morning with Camille holding my hand because she didn't fully understand yet what was happening, that I would look out for her. I had kept that promise imperfectly. I paid for her college quietly, without fanfare. I checked on her, sent cards, showed up when I could. She called me on my birthday every year without fail and once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because I had mentioned offhandedly that I wasn't feeling well. She had never once asked me for a thing. On my 6th day in the hospital, Robert came back with paperwork, a notary seal, and 2 witnesses, Brianna, who agreed to serve in that capacity, and an orderly named Gerald, who had a warm handshake and asked no questions. Everything was signed and notarized and witnessed entirely legal, entirely binding. Robert told me it would hold. I believed him. That same afternoon, Dennis called my cell phone. The first call in 6 days. I answered. "Dad." His voice had that particular quality it got when he wanted something. Smooth, careful, slightly warmer than usual. "Hey, we've been worried. How are you feeling?" I let the silence sit for a moment. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heating unit and the distant sound of a cart rolling down the hallway. I looked at the window, at the bare trees outside, at the gray November sky. "Worried," I said. "Of course, Dad. It was a scary thing. We didn't know how serious. Brianna called you 6 days ago, I said. She told you it was serious. She told you I might not make it. Silence. Dad, it's complicated. Dennis and I were both dealing with. You told her you'd deal with it when the time came, I said. That's what you told her, you'd deal with it when the time came, I said. That's what you told her, while I was on oxygen in the emergency room. He started to say something. I didn't want to hear it. I said, don't come here, Dennis, and ended the call. Wayne called 11 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 3 minutes and 40 seconds of explanation that was not an apology. I listened to it once and deleted it. The next morning, Evelyn came to visit. She brought a container of chicken soup she had made herself and a small succulent in a terracotta pot because she knew I liked plants and thought having something living in the room might help. She sat in the chair beside my bed for 2 hours and talked to me about nothing important. Her daughter in Arizona, a book she was reading. The new family that had moved in 2 doors down from her. I cannot fully explain what those 2 hours meant to me. I just know that when she left, I felt steadier than I had since I'd woken up on that kitchen floor. On my 7th day, the neurologist cleared me for discharge. Brianna helped me gather my things, the clothes Robert had brought me, my wallet, my phone, a few books. On the bedside table was the one thing I had asked Robert to bring from my house. A small wooden box, roughly the size of a shoebox, that I had made myself in my garage workshop about 15 years earlier. Inside were some of Patricia's things that I kept close. A folded letter she'd written me early in our marriage. Her nursing school pin. A photograph of the 2 of us at the Grand Canyon, 1994. Both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. The box had a small crack in one corner where I had dropped it once and badly repaired it. I ran my thumb over that crack and thought, I am not done yet. I had asked Robert to do one more thing before I left the hospital. He'd arranged for the locks on my house to be changed. Dennis's key, Wayne's key. Neither would work anymore. Any of their belongings at the house had been gathered into boxes on the porch, covered with a tarp against the weather. I also left something on the kitchen table inside. An envelope. Sealed. Their names on the front. The taxi home took 20 minutes. I watched Ohio pass outside the window, the highway, the familiar exit, the gas station on the corner I'd gone to for 15 years, the turn onto my street, my house, the rose garden in front, brown and dormant for winter but still there, still holding the shape Patricia had given it. I paid the driver, took my bag, and walked up the front steps with my cane. I had agreed to use a cane for a few weeks, which I disliked intensely, and when inside, the house smelled like itself. Old wood and coffee and the cedar blocks I kept in the closets. I stood in the front hallway for a moment and let it settle over me. I was home. I made tea carefully, my left hand still slightly clumsy, and sat in my chair in the living room. I called Camille. She picked up before the second ring. Uncle Walter. Robert told me you were coming home today. How are you feeling? Better, I said. A lot better. Are you sure you don't need me to come up? I can come up tomorrow morning if... Not yet, I told her. I'll call you when I'm ready. I just wanted you to know I'm home. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm really glad you're okay. I was so scared when Robert called. I know, I said. I know, sweetheart. After I hung up, I sat in the chair and let the quiet of the house do its work on me for a while. Outside the window, the street was still, the late afternoon light flat and pale. I thought about Dennis, about Wayne, about the years I had given both of them and the way they had received it, carelessly, as though my giving was a fixed law of nature rather than a choice I had made every single time. I thought about Patricia saying, Walter, you have to stop. I had stopped, 40 years late maybe, but stopped. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. They're at the house. I did not respond. I already knew what would come next. Dennis called first. He lost the careful smoothness in his voice entirely now. There was nothing underneath it anyway, and we both knew that. He was loud, and he was shocked, and he could not seem to decide whether to be angrier about the locks or the boxes on the porch or the bank accounts, so he kept cycling through all 3. I let him talk for almost a full minute. The streetlight outside my window flickered on. I watched it. Dad, you cannot do this. That's my equipment in the garage. The garage is my property, I said. You stored things there, without asking and without any agreement. Robert has sent you a letter about retrieving them through proper scheduling. This is insane. You're punishing us for not dropping everything. You told the nurse I was not your problem, I said, while I was on oxygen. I'm not punishing you, Dennis. I'm just not pretending anymore. He said things after that increasingly louder. I held the phone and let him say them. When he had run out, I said, "Good night," and ended the call. Wayne's call came 9 minutes later. Wayne cried, which Dennis never would. I had seen Wayne use tears strategically enough times that they no longer moved me the way they once had. He was sorry, he said. They had panicked, he said. They hadn't known how serious it was, he said, which was not true. He said he loved me and he missed Mom and he didn't want things to be like this. What did you do with her jewelry? I asked. The crying stopped. A pause, the kind that has a shape to it. What? Your mother's bracelet. Her pearls. The things that were in my dresser drawer. I know, Wayne. Another pause, longer this time. Dad, I was going to. Good night, I said, and hung up. I sat in the dark living room for a long time after that, not because I was devastated, though there was grief in it. There is always grief when you stop lying to yourself about something you have known for years. I sat there because I needed to feel the full weight of what I was letting go of. The version of my sons I had spent decades hoping was the real one underneath. It wasn't. I had finally accepted that. It hurt, but it hurt the way setting a broken bone hurts, sharp and necessary, and the beginning of something healing correctly. I slept better that night than I had slept in months. In the weeks that followed, I did my physical therapy, took my medications, used the cane with slightly less resentment, and let myself be helped. Evelyn brought food twice a week. Robert came by on Saturdays. My doctor, a serious young woman named Dr. Senades. My doctor, a serious young woman named Dr. Tur. Peterson, who did not sugarcoat anything, told me at my 6-week checkup that my recovery was ahead of schedule and that I needed to keep my stress low. I told her I was working on it. She looked at me over her glasses like she wasn't entirely convinced, but would accept the answer. Camille came up in December. She stayed for a week, sleeping in the guest room, and we spent the mornings drinking coffee and talking. Really talking, the way I hadn't talked to either of my sons in years. She helped me clear out some things in the garage. She cooked. She fixed the Wi-Fi router that had been unreliable for months because neither Dennis nor Wayne had ever bothered to help me with it even when I asked. On her last morning, she found Patricia's box of recipe cards in a kitchen cabinet and sat at the table for 2 hours going through them, asking me about each dish. I told her what I remembered. She took photos of every card on her phone so she wouldn't lose them. When she left, I walked her to her car. She hugged me for a long time and said, "You know, I'd have been there. If I had known, I would have dropped everything." "I know," I said. "I know you would have." She drove away, and I stood on the front porch in my coat and watched until her car turned the corner. The rose garden was still dormant at my feet, just bare canes and dark earth, but I could already picture what it would look like in June. Dennis called 3 more times that month. The first time to argue, the second time to request access to retrieve his equipment from the garage on his own terms, the third time to inform me that he had consulted a lawyer about my mental state at the time of the changes to my will. I let Robert handle all 3. Robert, who has seen everything in 38 years of legal work and is not impressed by bluffing, told me the third call was not a serious legal threat. I already knew that. I had been very much of sound mind in that hospital room, and the paperwork was bulletproof. And they knew it too. Wayne stopped calling after the jewelry conversation. I was not sure what that said about him, exactly, but I noticed it. In February, Robert came by on a Saturday with coffee and a folder. He spread the documents on my kitchen table and walked me through the trust. How it was structured, what Camille would receive, when and how the house would transfer. He had done careful, excellent work, the kind of work only someone who genuinely cares does. When he was finished, I told him that, and he waved it off the way he always waved things off. But I could tell he was pleased. Before he left, he stopped at the door and said, "You know, Patricia would be proud of you." I thought about that for a long time after he left. I wasn't sure proud was exactly the right word. I thought she would mostly be relieved that I had finally listened to what she had been telling me for years. I think she would have sat down at this kitchen table, looked at me with that particular steady look she had, and said, "Walter, about time." I smiled at the empty kitchen. About time was right. Spring came slowly that year, the way it does in Ohio, teasing and then retreating before finally committing. I started going for short walks in the mornings just around the block at first. Then farther as my strength came back. I was working in the garage again by March. Nothing heavy, just the small woodworking projects I had always found calming. A birdhouse, a set of shelves for Evelyn's hallway because she had admired mine. Camille called every Sunday. She had started cooking her way through Patricia's recipe cards, sending me photos of the results. The pot roast had turned out well. The lemon pound cake needed work, she admitted. I told her it had always needed work, that Patricia had kept that recipe card in the box mostly for sentimental reasons, and not because the recipe was reliable. Camille laughed, and the sound of it filled the kitchen. One Sunday morning in April, I went out to the rose garden. The canes were budding, small tight clusters of dark green just beginning to unfurl. Patricia had planted 7 different varieties in that garden over the years, learned each one's particular temperament, knew which needed more water and which needed more sun. I had watched her do it, but had never learned the specifics myself, which I now regretted. But the garden had come back every year without me knowing exactly why, as though it had its own reasons. I knelt down carefully and pulled a few weeds from the base of the nearest cane. The soil was cold and damp and good. I worked slowly, my left hand still not quite as precise as the right, but functional enough, and I thought about the year that had passed. The kitchen floor, the hospital, the calls from Dennis, the weight I had been carrying that I had finally put down. I thought about Camille's voice on Sunday mornings. I thought about Evelyn bringing soup. I thought about Robert sitting in the hospital chair with his leather notebook and his good coffee and not asking me once whether I was sure. I thought about Patricia's box with its cracked corner, sitting on my dresser upstairs. I had spent a lot of years building things for other people. Furniture, a business loan, a second chance, a third chance, a fourth, and handing them over and watching what happened to them. Some things you build stay built. Some things you hand to the wrong people and they don't. The important thing I was learning was knowing the difference. I finished the weeding, stood up slowly with the help of the garden border for balance, and looked at what would be, in 6 weeks, a rose garden in full bloom. Patricia would have deadheaded the spent blooms every morning before her coffee. I would probably forget most of the time and do it in batches. The garden would survive that. It had survived everything else. I went inside and put the kettle on and called Camille, a day early, just because I wanted to hear her voice. She picked up before the second ring, the way she always did. "Uncle Walter, everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Just wanted to talk." She said she had been thinking about coming up again in May, if that was all right. Maybe staying for 2 weeks this time. Maybe going through more of the recipe cards. Maybe helping me figure out the rose garden. I told her that sounded like exactly the right thing. The kettle began to whistle, steady and warm, and outside the kitchen window the street was waking up to a bright April morning, unhurried and full of light. Thank you for watching. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I read every one. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, please share it with them. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Raymond. There are more stories coming, and I think you'll want to be here for them.